So we have a distinguished panel. We'll try and cover as many issues as we can on the open data scenario in India and the issues around it. So like Dr. Vinay Thakur was saying, we've come a long way from when the NDSAP was formulated in 2012. So it's been 11 years, but we've covered quite some distance. But at the same time, we also have gaps to fill. So, we have quite a few national data portals, we have states. Himachal is launching today, we have Sikkim, Telangana and a few other states that have their own open data portals. We have private sector open data portals, one from the ISB itself, the India data portal, and some sector specific data portals. So the OGD landscape is obviously huge, and there has been tremendous growth. So what we'll try and do today is understand where we are, how far we've come, and how can we ensure that we can actually use this growth to better the governance landscape. To start with Mr. Mukesh, so now that we're launching the Himachal data plan, what kind of challenges you have seen while you were this, and in general, state governments or governments in general. So what are the challenges and what kind of progress have you made with this?
With regards to the availability and accessibility of government data to general public or startups who want to build upon that, I think as Vinay Thakur sir very rightly pointed out, that 2012 onwards with the National Data Accessibility Policy, some progress was made in this regard. However, there is a general culture of non-sharing that exists within the government, which we have the Right to Information Act in existence since 2005, which has this Proactive Disclosure Act. But in case you happen to visit government websites, you will realize that proactive disclosures per se are very limited to the administrative staff, their salaries, their telephone contact details, that's it. So one of the biggest challenges is to overcome this roadblock that in general the government has, that we should not per se provide data to everybody who is asking for it, because it can be misused. There is this concern that exists in the back of the mind. Second issue comes with regards to lack of data standardization across different departments. Many departments per se still are continuing to maintain physical handwritten records. When you ask them to share data, they will scan it up and share PDF or JPEG files with you, which per se do not provide any usability with anybody. Thirdly, I think there is also a limited awareness in the government sector as to why and how exactly the sharing of data can benefit. Even if you leave aside general public, there is also a reluctance to share data between departments and between governments. It's very difficult for us in the state itself to take data of our own citizens, our own beneficiaries from, let's say, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which is run by a different ministry, Narega, which is run by a different ministry. So, but gradual change can be seen. Niti Aayog has recently started with its national data analytics platform. Plus, I think there is also this realization that as more and more data is made available to the citizens, it improves the functioning as well as the scheme implementation, allows citizen participation in monitoring of the expenditure of the public exchequer funds, and at the same time also provides a boost to the general economy, because there is a very large sector and a large financial gain that I think can be built upon the huge amounts of data that the government stores of citizens, as well as, even if not personal data, then non-personal data as well. And that is something I think which the government and the country is yet to explore. And this is an initiative, the Hind Data Portal is an initiative by the state government, so that we can also try and figure out exactly how we can collaborate with the private sector, with the research institutions, on how the data that is available with us can be firstly made more accessible to everybody, how it can be utilized to address the lacunae that exist in our scheme implementation, how it can be utilized for evidence-based policy making by us. Because we have data, but analysis and analytics capability is not as much in the state government as it is existing with to people with institutions like ISB or with private players?
Thanks, Rakesh. I mean, like you were saying, there's a lot of fear within government, especially the lower ranks. We collaborate with government of Telangana on local data. This is what we do. They're scared of negative PR and they want to see us. So one of the ways to overcome is give successful examples of how the data has transformed us, even ways to. So for instance, we have an example in Telangana where a lot of fintech firms were using bidding. They were using registration data that was provided by the government every month. Since there is no direct data of mapping areas to economy, so they were using this as a proxy for economy and then deploying their roles. They said this was really useful and they were literally chasing the government every month. Where is the data? Where is it? So Manpreet, I would like to know from you, especially in the upper landscape. So do we have any successful examples of where data-driven policy making, where we have open data driving policies so that it becomes an example for more and more governments to come forward and share?
What was there in the industry and what actually is being taught in the classrooms. And in the GovTech front, when I see the kind of work ISB, this whole wing, public policy is doing, I see the gap as very, very less. So whatever I learned historically, or what I learned in day-to-day basis, I feel you are learning on a day-to-day basis. That's where I want to congratulate the world. Coming back to the data part, I would like to see an example. We built a Chief Minister dashboard in state of Punjab. When we wanted to present it in the state cabinet, we wanted to make it open. But there was, as I mentioned, there was a resistance to the kind of data, data, performance data, or be it on the scheme data, be it other data sets, there was a resistance. So we could not do it public. So that's a bigger challenge, we see it. Coming back to the urban data. Now, if we look at urban research reports, be it RBI report, be it World Bank, Niti Aayog, the data is a challenge. I could not find property tax data of all the states, all the UTs in an open So even I don't know what is the property tax collection in the country today. Some studies says 0.25% of GDP, some says 0.5%, some say 1% of GDP. That's a challenge. When I can't plan even the city finances or urban finances. That's the first challenge we face. The urban data is not there in so be it tax revenue data, be it non-tax revenue data. So that's a challenge we face in a general day-to-day life. That's an urban data challenge. To help mitigate this challenge, we have built a national urban dashboard at a country level, at a central level, which integrates all the IT applications of urban areas. So today I have around 12 states which are on my dashboard. I have live data of these states. I can tell that which city has how much property tax collection happened yesterday, last month. I can benchmark. City like a state like Telangana, like Haryana, property tax per GDP. So it's a journey in itself. Urban data is not in very good shape, but with help of digital public goods, Vinayji mentioned digital public goods, we have created a digital public good, which helps make services online in a very shorter and efficient manner. To build a platform called Dubbudu, which is being used by all the states and cities. So they were building data in short duration. So that's where digital public good is very much required for building applications of the future, wherein data will be built, and then integrating that data on a national dashboard for analysis, benchmarking. These things are very important in our scenario. Coming back to the work being done, we have smartcities.data.gov.in, where 100 smart cities, they have put in their data on this data.gov.in and being utilized by industry, academia for their research purposes. That's it.
Thanks, Manpreet. Pratap, coming to you, you've done Stats of India. We know that, like Mukesh was also saying that putting out data is the first step. So we need a lot of value-added services and data may or may not be able to put it up. So as somebody who's been using a lot of open data and using it for purposes and adding a lot of value on top of it. So for example, we're also building we built a data portal. So how do you see these value-added services, all of this coming together to promote the goal of governance?
Can you? I'll probably narrate a small story. I think 10 years back, this challenge with they were working in the government, they were collecting data from the ground, basically doing geolocation of the roads which were getting it. But most of the times people didn't know why they were collecting it. And it was the same case with a lot of the census enumerators. A few years back I was explaining the same thing, what do we do with it? But I didn't have that intention. I was just simply sharing, okay, this is the maps, we do. And at that point, the enumerator struck him that what he was doing is not a simple data entry. It is actually adding a lot of value for a lot of other downstream industries and activities to get those insights. So I think at some point when we're trying to build these systems, I think one of the things that we do want to keep in mind is where are we getting this data? There are real people whose job is to collect this data. I think maybe our job, like, we may be discussing a lot of aspects of how we use the data that's collected, but probably also want to keep in mind that the efforts that are coming in to get that data and how do we even appreciate that. But coming back to the question that you asked, that we do see a lot of value that the public data that we've been used for a lot of time, but over the last 10 years, I think a lot of time was usually spent in cleaning up the data or joining the data from multiple different sources. It doesn't really make sense for me to compare GDP of, let's say, Mumbai with Hyderabad, because then I want to do a per capita. For which, can I compare population of 2015 with the 2020 population? No, because there's a lot of migration that's happening. So then do we have estimates of where the population is today? We do have some data sets, but mostly published outside of India, and we don't know, do we have the right boundary lines to which we want to estimate. So I think there's a lot of nuance that usually gets into when we want to do this analysis. And a lot of times, even in the data portals, when let's say things get aggregated, let's say Mumbai population is so much, which Mumbai boundary are we using? Are we considering Navi Mumbai? Are we considering Thane? Or is it only the municipal boundary and so on? So I think one of the additions that I see could be useful for data portals is also how are you defining these things? And I see that NDAP did a wonderful thing that when you're trying to combine different data sets and for different geographies, they try to do these estimations, that is splitting the boundaries or combining them. But I do think that nuances sometimes get missed, and a lot of people produce like visuals or infographics by comparing different time periods and different estimations, and that probably also leads to a lot of misinformation. And I think the onus will come back to the sources from where we're putting this data, and I think one of the helpful things would be to add that nuance of how are these things calculated, if they are calculated. So, because as a creator sometimes, you also tend to not go through so much detail. You just want to take out the CSV, just join things and then put up. But in the process, the source data set may be viewed by 10,000 people, but the visual that you create may be viewed by 1 lakh people, and that's where some kind of misinformation might also. But this apart, I think in the private sector too, I think the challenge usually has been a lot of people still struggle to make sense of their own internal data. Really, today if I want to get a sense per pin code level, the number of sales people I have, am I selling enough FMCG goods? Or if I want to expand my distribution, where do I do it? Maybe we don't have a pin code level population analysis. But there may be ways in which the private sector can do that data, but do we at least have data at a district level? We may have district census data, but it's 2011. So I think a lot of such data sets do exist, created by a lot of research labs, a lot of other places, but I think we don't have that unified portal which, even if we are not hosting them, but at least a way to discover the data sets. So I think the discoverability of datasets will become a key theme for a lot of people who are building things on top of these datasets. I also believe like any product that we're launching today, I think we're doing good in terms of making data more accessible, but a lot of our historical data is still in PDF files. Like I think the Election Commission, starting in the last few years, they started publishing these Excel files of the statistical reports. But the old reports are still in PDF files, which means we still have to go back, because it doesn't make sense just to do like last 5 years analysis. We need to go back in history and see how they evolution. So I do think rather than as much we focus on building things, we also want to budget some time for the maintenance of these systems. Can we backfill some of the data sets that we already
There are at least 4 jurisdictions, one revenue jurisdiction, one the municipal jurisdiction, there's a jurisdiction that the electricity department employs officially. So it's near impossible to even write this up. So I'd like to go to Ashish now. Ashish has, the private sector plays a very key role in furthering the goal of open data. So how do you see open government data driving economy? One. have any examples of what is NASSCOM doing, NASSCOM and other industry bodies, and is there a way where private data can also be integrated to these platforms for checks and balances?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, and very happy to be here. I think Dr. Vinay Thakur in the morning already talked about a couple of initiatives that we are involved in as a task force with MIT, and also the skilling part. I think fundamentally the thing about data is utilization. Data is for utilization. So if we have to make that happen, on the talent part, I think there is a huge shortage in the country today in terms of people who are data scientists, people who do data analytics, not because in absolute numbers they are less, but the demand is huge. So I think for us the Future Skill Initiative is one part of that data utilization piece, that you need to have talent. The second piece is more around how do you think about data utilization. So fundamentally we are looking at it in two ways. One, just making government data more available in a manner that can be used, even if it's just data dump, but it's accurate, updated, because so without data we are anyway flying blind and we can't solve it, we can't see, and bad data sometimes is worse than no data. So I think so we need to and that's why the role of policy and regulation, because my core is policy. It's easier to think of laws and policies when you have to ban and restrict something, and then you look at enforcement. But when you want to enable something, I think it's much more complex, and that's where instead of hard laws, what you need is policy and policy direction. So I remember in 2020 there was an expert committee on non-personal data, and nasscom was on that, and I had the opportunity to kind of help in that effort. And the key thing that we drove in that conversation was that how can we look at data utilization through high-value data sets idea. And I think that is what is now coming in, as we heard in the earlier talk. So I think that's one journey. And then from an industry point of view, I think a lot of SMEs, startups are data users, and they have a huge opportunity in terms of saying that if there is data available, they can actually layer on top of it and provide businesses. There's also data intermediaries who can value add, correct, and improve existing data, and then provide that as a service. And there are also data providers where there are gaps in the market. If the private sector can actually come in and fill that gap. So from a nasscom perspective, I think we see ourselves as contributing at the ecosystem level, working with the state government, center, and the industry to make sure that the data can get utilized. And the last bit I think is that we need to be able to leverage the emerging technology. So when we're talking about in terms of urban infrastructure, we talk about digital twins, and we talk about 5G, IoT, and now suddenly the conversations on AI are much more common-based conversations. But I think if we just look at the potential of the technology to be able to analyze data, it is tremendous. So now government is talking about ease of living. So that entire ease of living, I think open data has a huge role in enabling that. And that's where I think industry can come together with government. If you look at the last 11-year journey, I think there's a huge progress if you zoom back and say that earlier the point was about just making data available. Now I think there is a realization and effort, and we see it through various initiatives where we are talking about utilization of data. I think that's where the role of for industry is.
So like Dr. Vinay was saying, there's a huge issue within the government about gaps in data. For instance, broken links is a huge issue. So with the MOSPI website, for instance, you find broken links almost every once in a while. Then there are issues of the data source now with all good intention updating data, but they only give 10 years. So data comes in 24, your 2013 data which was there is missing. So we see a lot of these gaps. So I would like to go to Professor Vikas to understand, one, what do you see as gaps in the overall open data ecosystem from the source side? And for instance, we see there is huge gap in legal data. So except for couple of non-profits trying to do something with the legal data, we don't have as much legal data. So except for When I say data, hard data, not in terms of information. So what are the gaps that you see in general in the ecosystem, and anything that you could suggest to improve?
Thank you, Rakesh. So, Rakesh, before I come to that question, why free flow of data, free flowing data becomes very important in a developing country perspective, right? So we know that as we have data from European countries to OECD countries that how positively it affects GDP, free flowing data. But look at the benefit of scale and scope in data. If you have volume in data, it can lead to innovative products. Like, say for example, AI algorithm. You can train these algorithms in a much better fashion if you have scale in data. Scope in data, like two different sets of data, if you club them together, something completely new can come out of it. For example, in the pharmaceutical sector. And we know that in the developing country context, innovation is a means towards development. That's why it becomes all the more important to harness the power that free flow in data inherently has. Alright, but there is something that we should also be aware of, like what data governance actually means. Does it just mean maximizing the welfare that free flow of data has? No. The OECD defines data governance as like maximizing the free flow, maximizing the welfare coming out of free flowing data, while also taking account of competing interests such as privacy, such as data protection and intellectual property rights. Now, the second side often is something that falls in the blind spot. Well, that should not happen, because if you take away trust, if you take away faith from any technology, any industry, it's not going to last long. Unfortunately, we do not have any data protection legislation as of yet, so that is why the task is easy. But sooner or later, we're going to have this legislation. And the task of public policy, as you people would be knowing better than I do, is to strike a right balance between competing interests. And this balancing exercise will begin soon as we have legislations on privacy, legislation on data protection, etc. Now the third thing is that, I was not planning to speak on it, but my colleagues have already spoken a lot about open data, the problems that it has, the initiatives that Indian government has taken. Dr. Thakur in his inaugural speech spoke about digital public goods. So what are digital public goods, right? I see many young faces. So digital public goods are basically non-rivalrous and non-excludable. I cannot, exclude you from the street light. It's non-rivalrous. You can use it as much as I can. No problem with that. So when it translates into the digital sector, these are open protocols, open APIs that everybody can use it. Now India has come up with something very interesting, like using GPG not just to attain sustainable development goals, but to induce competition in the digital markets. That is something which was just existing in theories in a couple of research papers. But have you heard of ONDC, Open Network for Digital Commerce? I see many people nodding, right? Now that is the beauty of digital public good, that you are breaking the platforms and turning them into network. So what does that mean? It means that platform which is integrated on both the sides, not to be disintegrated, in the sense that there will be manufacturers, there will be suppliers, there will be people who will be providing different logistical service, and you will be free to pick and choose these people. If you go to Amazon decides, right, how you're going to make the payment, how it's going to be delivered to your doorstep, and if you do not like your shoes, how you're going to return it back to Amazon seller, right? But with ONDC, you can pick and choose. But we did a paper, I did a paper with a marketing expert, and we realized that as of now, there are certain shortcomings, because if you look at the efficiency in Amazon integrated platform, they do not have double marginalization, they have efficiency in integrated service providing, etc., which ONDC will have to take into account. But in theory, India has taken a huge step, and the entire world is watching if this experiment is successful, then you can translate the same experiment into mobility into other kind of services. Alright, so here I stop. Of course, there are gaps, like Rakesh, I'm not sure if I have understood your question properly. There are gaps, but I would say that, since we know that, free-flowing data has huge value, it should be promoted, definitely. But yes, I come from the other side, from the side of regulation, And hence I would say that please also take into account of data protection and privacy rights.
Thanks, Professor Vikas, that was helpful. Karthik, now you work extensively with startups. So, as you know, startups are now hungry for data, especially, not a single businessman goes without slides on, the TAM and, most of these flow from what the government does. So, I want to understand, so do you foresee a model where we have demand-driven data disclosure from the government, or are we yet there? And what can startups do to further the goal forward?
Thank you, Ashish. So it's an honor to talk in front of my batchmates, Mr. Kittu. I'm also a student of the AMP of the current cohort. But there are a few things that I would like to talk upon. It's both sides. If the government, enables certain kind of technology and policy, then it will enable the startups. As we say, only the availability of open data can enable new technological innovation and collaboration. But yes, and the access to it is very critical. And I think Karnataka open data policy was established in 2019. I'm following the standards to access and leverage the Karnataka state open data portal. And explore new avenues. And since then, a lot of startups have been trying to work with the government on various things. And, of course, there were privacy concerns, there were technical barriers, there were limited access to data. But I think certain government departments have now started working. And as an example, I would like to talk about the e-Sahamati portal that is there in Karnataka, which is actually a tool to empower citizens to own, control and share data. Based on that, an example is that, for example, some student data that is uploaded, they can log in through their Aadhaar, upload the student data, and with their consent, it would be sent to recruiters. So startups are actually actively working, on those spheres. For example, there is a smart city initiative in Bangalore, Hubli, Mysore, and Belgavi. And there is the Karnataka Information Technology Society, which I work very closely with, who has opened up some parts of the data for startups. Also, the Karnataka State Remote Sensing Authority, like some of my colleagues were talking about the high-value data sets, that is also open. And also, the Karnataka State Pollution Control Board has certain open sets of data with which startups are working with. There's also a portal called, Subida, I was talking to a friend from Geo, one of the companies in Mumbai also is working, eGov is working with them to provide open, data access. Maybe the potential of integrating privately generated data with open data platforms is where we have to look at and, strengthen what I would say. Because under the Karnataka Open Data Initiative, they are trying to leverage it, but of course their integration with other state data, I think, should also be made available. And data sharing should be encouraged. And I think the government is expanding more, but investing in data infrastructure also is very important from the government side. I think during COVID, we saw that. It was on national TV. I was part of the Chief Minister's War Room on COVID-19, and I think it was 3 days into COVID, and we had the first dashboard up in Karnataka in 48 hours. That was only possible because IIIT Bangalore, the Rajiv Gandhi Institute of Health Sciences, the Mahanagarpalika, and also the Information Department and the Karnataka State Health Department had some pool of data sets available. So we could pull data and start with the real-time dashboard. It was on national news also that we had built so these are, it's a PPP model forward. Of course, we are with academia and some of the startups and the government are working together with some of the departments. And also maybe in the land record space, trying to do some strides, but that takes time.
Thanks, Karthik. Rwitwika, you work with a lot of public reps and governments. You kind of fill the gap, generate a lot of data yourself. So I want to ask a related question. So technically it is private data and that is used for policy formulation. And rightly there are concerns about private data, about quality, about, So how do you think, what kind of checks and balances are necessary for integrating private data into policy making or larger OTT platforms, and what has been your experience?
Thank you so much. It's really hard to follow after so many incredible speakers with such a really watching myself be the last speaker of this room. With that being said, I think a lot of points that were made really valid about data and its use, including one of the points that Pratap mentioned about how data is collected in the process. I would take a risk of challenging two assumptions on this conversation. One, and they're quite risky, this is the all respect. One, that government data is where the buck stops. We're all talking about government data and how important that is. But there are so many actors out there who are collecting really good data, which is not given as much weightage because the backing of a large enough entity does not exist. And because I was mostly based in the US, that we noticed that a lot of policy making actually happens with private sector. As long as you can verify it, as long as you can understand the quality is good, that is something which exists. Which, to your point and to your question, Swaniti collects data on two levels. We analyze what is government data and we go through all the websites and we have a platform called Chano, which is very similar to a lot of other platforms. What gets me excited is we also have individual pilots, which we do at a district level, where we do a census style data. And we'll go into each household, and we're doing this in Kanpur right now, in Agra right now, Chhattisgarh. We'll go into each household and we'll ask people there whether they're getting access to like the government schemes. This is very important. And you start to tease out the nuance of things. You start to realize that the person who's collecting the data is asking a question about, let's say, Matru Vandana Yojana. The lady who's responding doesn't know what the heck Matru Vandana Yojana is. So you ask, आपको मिलता है क्या? मुझे लगता है कि कुछ नहीं होता, ऐसा कुछ नहीं. And then you say, नहीं, जब वो औरत pregnant होती है तब आपको वो 500 रुपए आता है क्या? And you say, oh, हाँ, वो तो आता है. And you realize that maybe the information which you are getting actually needs to be thought about more deeply from the perspective of when you're collecting that information. Especially because the government work and policy making is so nuanced and quite complex that if you're relying on that data, there has to be equal robustness in the process of collecting that data. And so that robustness for me gets really interesting when I compare what I see on a Jano platform, which is comparing national level data and state. And I'll see one thing there, and then I'll look at what we call ward mitras who are collecting district level data. What's going on with it? And you realize that there needs to be, like, we are all enamored, and rightly so, at the complexity of dashboards, and that is beautiful. But I think there is merit in being equally enamored by the process of people going into the ground and collecting it. So that's kind of one thing that is there. And then the second thing is, what I touched on initially, is that when it comes to the richness of India's private sector and civil society, there is so much beautiful information which is coming in. How do we create that ecosystem where on platforms like this, we have some incredible officers from the government who are open about understanding what the data ecosystem is like? How do you create that knowledge exchange which is more than about building the platforms, but also about utilizing the data that a lot of surveys and a lot of information collection is already generating? And a much more complex issue around that is how do you build that trust that that data which is coming is also good and worthy of taking decisions? And that one is a very tricky one. But I think, the last piece that I'll share is my total point when it comes to data and information has always been the US jobs market data. Like every quarter those guys come out with like this is what they do. I absolutely love it because you notice how the entire government machinery then galvanizes itself to try to address whether there's too much jobs, too little jobs, what is happening. So if we take that as a flagship, and the US labor economists tend to not just have the data which is primarily government generated, but then expert inputs which come in, then civil society inputs which come in and how data was collected. We notice that that is an ideal example of how a consortium of stakeholders works to address something which is a public concern and a policy concern, and is really able to create something which is stable.
Yeah, thanks, Rwitwika. I think a logical take, Mukesh. So one of the things that is concerning, like Rwitwika is saying, is apart from transactionally generated data, auto-generated transactions, which is mostly machine generated, but there's quite a lot of data which is actually being generated by somebody sitting at the back office. So entering all kinds of scheme, and most of them are also contractors with little accountability. So at the government level, I wanted to understand whether it's the government you're working with, the larger, are you aware of any initiatives where, because I don't see a separate cadre of data entry operators, for instance, because that is what we need if we have to collect quality data like Rwitwika was saying. So the government level, are you aware of any initiatives in Himachal where you are working to work on quality, to work on these issues of collection?
Alright, thank you. I would like to firstly distinguish between the two types of information that the government stores with itself. The one is concerning the schemes, projects, etc. that we implement, which is project oriented, the monitoring of which is done by the Government of India through different platforms which are already in existence. Although there is a large amount of pressure because the number of platforms has exponentially increased over the last few years. I think somebody pointed out as well that instead of creating silos, we should have a nationalized, unified sort of a system so that you do not have to make similar entries in multiple locations. However, this type of information about project regarding finances, actual work, tasks done, etc. is relatively accurate because it has multiple channels of verification. There is an officer who firstly enters, then there are at least 2 to 3 channels of verification, plus a random survey, random inspections of actual data entries, because the information drives the policy making at the Government of India level. For example, you have the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana. That is one of the most, I would say, checked data entries which are done at the level of a junior engineer who is sitting in the government office, at the level of a block or a TC. So you have him entering, then you have this senior who checks around 40% of the entries, then when you go up around 10% of the entries, then you have quality monitoring cells at the level of the state government, central government, who also go in this. So there are, because the government also realizes that data fudging can happen, especially when sometimes the performance gets measured on the basis of what data gets entered. So in our attempt to sometimes showcase that we are doing extremely well, people do tend to overestimate and provide not literally false, but sometimes more optimistic information so that they are not judged harshly by anybody. So to address those issues, usually in almost all such monitoring platforms, multiple check and balances system is put into place. The second data collection that comes is when you have the citizen interface, where you go and ask them to provide data to, for further planning. So that is a more difficult and difficult exercise in terms, because when the government goes to the citizen to ask for data, the citizen feels if I tell him that I am well off, I might miss out on something. We have the, you would know about the Awas Yojana. It's a very great example of this sort of feeling in the people that if we tell them that we have a house, then we will not get other benefits. So they will tell you that as of right now, I do not have a house. So for example, in Himachal, during the first phase of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, we had total across the state around 40,000 households were identified in Chamba district, which were to be provided with houses because they did not have a house. After 10 years of work, when they went for the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana 2, the number increased to 64,000. They said that we still do not have houses because they felt everybody is getting 2.5 lakh rupees, 1.5 lakh rupees for making the house. So they showed their cow sheds or kacha structures. Usually Himachal has this concept of do ghari, where because your field is slightly away from your farm, from your main residence, so you have a smaller structure there also where you stay during cultivation exercises. So they would show that as the actual house. So that sort of, and because the people who are collecting the information do not really want to, let's say, disappoint the individual, because he looks up to them as if he takes my information and gets some benefit out of it. So that is one challenge that is faced, and technology is, I think, is one area which is being utilized to address this issue. You have because multiple sort of information of citizens gets captured. You have BPL database that exists separately, you have the electricity connection, you have motor vehicle registration. So then it was utilized to, for example, an individual is saying that I do not have a house, but he has 3 cars registered in his name. That was, such parameters were then used to identify the mistakes in data collection so that that can be verified. So I think sufficient checks and balances are put into place. However, the government functions with an aim that the data I am collecting is for this particular purpose, and I am only concerned with the accuracy of the information with regards to that purpose. The surrounding data that gets collected somehow then falls out of the sea. Nobody really thinks about it, how accurate it is, as long as I am able to fulfill the particular aim that I was focusing upon.
Thanks, Mukesh. Manpreet, I wanted to pick on what Pratap was saying about, especially nuances with respect to urban local bodies. Now that I'm not saying we're a majority urban country, but slowly getting there, quite a bit of it. So, from the NIDM side, is there an effort to to address these issues of jurisdictions? Because a lot of urban data comes not from the UL base, but a lot of other institutions and organizations. And secondly, what are the challenges that you see, especially in an urban context, with respect to government data collection and how private sector could contribute?
So Rakesh, I will talk about 3 fundamental questions. One, how do we collect good data? That's the first fundamental question in government. Second question, I would see, if it's good data, how do we move it to an open format? Third, how do we encourage stakeholders to utilize that open data to the best of, call it an SDG improvement, all those goals. So there are 3 fundamental questions. For the first question, second, third questions, the 3 sub-processes which we follow at Urban Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. One is the people part of it. So people, process and platform. So we take 3 fundamental areas. People, we have built capacities at city level. So all cities, smart cities I'm talking about, 100 smart cities, they have city data officers, which typically are kind of data owners, how data is produced, how data becomes interoperable within city networks, and so that's the people part, capacity part that needs to be built in our country at district level, departmental level. So that's the first takeaway we are starting in urban. Second, at the process or the policy part. So I'll talk about 2 things here. One, from a policy perspective, Sabra ma'am she's here. We built state data policy and we built, HRMS, Human Resource Management System in our state. Earlier, every department was using a separate employee ID for a separate system. So you can imagine 50 departments, they have 50 types of employee IDs in different departments. Now, with HRMS in place, there is a mandate by the government that this employee ID will be used across systems. So we have made it interoperable. Similarly, in urban, we are building service standards. Now, if we look at EODP, if we look at different global indices, they have a specific terminology. For property tax, small example, every state uses a different name. Some says property tax amount, some says property tax value, some say house tax. So for a small thing like this, we are building service standards, where we are trying to standardize the terminology we use in our citizen services or in general the government data part of it. Third is the platform part. I'm sure the cohort has seen ICCC of Chandigarh, Integrated Command and Control Center. No. I say it's a must visit. Chandigarh Smart City has built an integrated command and control center which integrates departmental data of all the city components. We're talking about citizen services, so I talked about scheme data, then pollution data, water supply data, STP data, I'm talking about all these data sets. ICCC is integrated. So if 100 cities they are able to do it, we need to move to other smaller cities so that the integration happens. Once integration happens, then the whole governance improves. In case there's an alert on the water supply that there's a leakage, there's an IoT sensor on the water supply line, there's a leakage to it, sensor detects it, the whole alert mechanism happens. So the whole governance improves with that kind of data collection. And from a technology part, we talked about digital public good. We are trying to, see that in the last 10 years, what has happened is a lot of vendor lock-in has happened. Some of those departments, they got stuck in either, with some proprietary softwares and all. Not digital public good, we are trying to create in urban so that states use it in an effective manner. And then lastly, we have collaborated with IISc for building in India urban data exchange. So all the cohort students, they should go through what IUDX in ISC is building. They're building data sets for cities. They are improving the interoperability within the city functions. So that's again a good must see for the cohort in the urban landscape.
Thanks, Manpreet. Pratap, I just wanted to pick up on your previous comments about nuances. As a user of the data, how do you think for the larger user community? So people, I'm sure the users are pretty much aware of what kind of data exists, especially those who use it regularly. But the gap, like you said, is in nuances and how it is collected. So, for instance, I remember this, this infographic that went viral about number of people, the percentage of people who drink alcohol across states. Sikkim was the highest, Telangana was the next, and when we looked at the questionnaire of NSS and the report of the NSS, this was a number who said they at least drink alcohol at least once a week. And alcohol, the definition of alcohol in the questionnaire also included a lot of local, which is not strictly alcohol. So a lot of these nuances get missed, and like you said, leads to misinformation, leads to a lot of untoward outcomes. So as a data user, what do you think, both from the government side and the private sector side, how do we address these nuances? How can we overcome this?
I think the onus really lies in the creator here, because sometimes, and I can be at blame for some of these things when I do, which is because of the time that we are living in and all of our attention spans, most of you would have happened to me and as well for you, we can't stick to a point for more than 10 seconds or 20 seconds. So we are very quick, we want to scroll things. And in the limited view in social media, we can't write so much. It's always limited, the nuance always gets lost. But I think what will be useful is to at least have that attitude, even for the government or for the creators, if someone is pointing out something is missed, instead of taking that as criticism, we should probably just try that we're probably improving the information context. So that ultimately what we want is a better conversation in the society. Right? Now, unfortunately, even when you take some of the public debates around PLFS and the CMI datasets, if you look at some of the surrounding conversation, it has always been on finding the blame, rather than improving the next set of surveys and so on. So I think while the creators, so people who create this stuff should take steps to make sure the nuance gets captured and they try to push for things, I think the more people do it, more people outside of the governments also start creating stories, I think we'll have at least an ecosystem of people that each other's hold accountable. Otherwise there's nowhere around, because they'll be only in the span of even take the case of most of the viral videos that go out today, right? A fraction of people create them. A much higher fraction of them propagate them without even watching it. So I don't think there's a quick fix solution for it to fix it anyway. It's just that can we make each of the person involved in that ecosystem more accountable? That's the only solution I think.
10 more minutes to go. The other speakers, if there is anything that you wish to say in about 2 to 3 minutes each, anything, whatever we have discussed in terms of how we can build marketplaces, how can we address gaps, how can we, are there examples that you wish to share of how open data has furthered, or anything related to regulation for services?
So I just thought it would be good to highlight the fact that in some work maybe for us policy folks, we know that the Information Technology Act is under revamp. It will be proposed to be called the Digital India Act, right? So there are 3 areas which probably we can think of working. First, scraping of data is perfectly legal, and it's a good way of utilizing data. But there are so many misconceptions and worries around it and safeguards which are needed. There are not enough framework of what is an ethical scraping kind of a framework. And because of that, what happens is that you hear news about GST saying scraping is prohibited, stuff like that. So I think how do as a policy folks think about that kind of framework. Second thing is that anything which is funded by government should be available at free or at a very nominal cost. And I was surprised to know that Bureau of Indian standards are copyrighted, and there had been a litigation journey from 2013 where even to get access to mandatory standards, it was very difficult. And after so much of activist effort, now they publish it, but still it's not available at a nominal or kind of cost. Third is that we are at a stage where API should be mandatory. I mean, DPI is digital public infrastructure, thankfully digitally native. So, but now we have had a maturity journey in terms of these platforms. So, can we through the legal framework put certain mechanisms where we can then easily leverage some of the opportunities in terms of data? And there is work to do in that. So, I just
I think a good point that, we often see law as an impediment, but law can also be an enabler. So when we are talking about non-personal data or personal data and benefits from data sharing, the law can create a framework that can maximize it. Say for example, the EU people, they have a concept called data altruism. That's a good concept, like you don't need a data, if you're sitting on space of data that can be put to use in a better way by someone else, let's share it with the other person. Likewise, if I can ascribe some value to this data and the other person is willing to give this data to me, there should be a trade in that. So yeah, law should be cognizant and mindful of this reality. And perhaps the policy makers will not will take that in.
Vikas was telling, but keeping some of these in mind, Karnataka had a data policy and startup policy sort of 2015-20, but now it's called, the new one is the 22-27 one. In that we had creating and strengthening the new age innovation networks and supporting mentorship and building inclusive and equitable startup ecosystem, but and also channelizing innovation. But the new policy now actually has a separate pillar called enablement and facilitation. And the government, that's why aims to leverage the power of data through this accessibility and making the data more open. That's why usability and the Cody and all of them actually have come in, like you said. I mean, it's a proactive step that is taken, and I think if state governments look at that, then it should be easy. And also the facilitation, like you said, of startups. So Karnataka has a new age incubation network. I'm very happy to see some students here, wherein each project is given 7 lakhs. I mean, there are 45 centers all over Karnataka. The Beyond Bengaluru mission is a decentralizing Bangalore. We are looking at 6 new hubs like the Mysore, Belgavi, and even Gulbarga, up north, Tumkur. So it's decentralization. I mean, we're talking in the class about some of those also. And along with this, for the open data-based governance, I mean, I think driving economy should be one of the major factors, I would say. I mean, the potential of open data to drive economic growth in the country is very huge. Like you were talking about ground level data, and I mean, I've had first-hand experience of going and collecting it. It's very difficult. So that might be, we should explore, how to look at open data for economic growth and, address societal challenges as poverty, healthcare access, and environmental sustainability, and we're looking at climate change. So I think overall encouraging data sharing, engaging the data with users, and developing data quality guidelines. These are some of the factors I think that would make this holistic. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, again, the last speaker, no pressure whatsoever. I think one of the things that was phenomenal, just ending on as a last comment from my side on this one, was what we saw in the last 2 years during the pandemic, or in the 3 years. If you remember the first wave that was there, it was outstanding in the way not just how data was collected and relayed, but in how it was used as well. We were for a good 2 years a completely data-driven society. And even today, if you look at the COVID numbers, like you get that on the front page. So there is no better example about the success of data, the success of the ability to collect it, and then respond immediately to what is coming. And if you remember back in the day, when the global numbers were coming out, you had Google who was generating it, you had Johns Hopkins who was generating it, and then you had some other universities in Europe. And what was fascinating was, coming back to a point I mentioned earlier, was you didn't necessarily rely on government data. relied on data from universities that governments took seriously enough to respond to things. And I think, as we're talking about data, its use, its challenges, one of the things we need to keep in mind is the tremendous success that you have when you have good data. And in India, I remember you would get district-wise data on COVID cases. That was mind-blowing. The only problem that I would see was that the administrative support systems were still not strong enough, where you needed like a DM and everyone around you to kind of make sure that the data was coming, right? So you had like full force, be like, kisko COVID hua, kahan pe hua, who's in a containment zone and who's not. And what I think post-COVID in this I would say is affected what I don't necessarily talk, but we need to kind of take that example of what data can do for us. What does it take for the administration to continually be able to deliver on that and then build on those pieces? Yeah.
Thanks, Rwitwika. As my co-panelists said, we've come quite some distance from the NDSAP in 2012. We have much more mature, better platforms for sharing open data, both at the central and state levels. We have private sector that is, there are way more users for data than we had before. We also, I think a couple of things, takeaways from this session would be, we need platforms to have these knowledge feedback, conversations, sharing knowledge, gaps, how, because I think formal structures are missing today, though we have informal ways of communicating what the users have, we need more formal structures. And I think the stakeholders coming together will make a huge difference. So it's not just the data collector at the grassroots level, but ultimately, somebody who is using it, who is consuming it. So we have a variety of stakeholders who are actually in this ecosystem. So thank you, each of you. I'm sure you all gain very valuable insights on the larger open data ecosystem in the country and the way forward. Thank you.